Hello, everybody. I just want to take a minute before starting this podcast to thank you all ever so much for supporting this podcast. We've been going on for over a year now of these episodes with a vast array of guests, which I've been honored to speak to, and obviously I've had some solo projects, but the people that I'm most appreciative of is yourselves, the listeners that are coming in and sharing this, leaving the reviews. And you guys give me purpose. You know, I've been honored to have this platform, and I'm even more so honored to have you to listen in. So if you really do like this podcast, please do leave a review for me. And, just push pause right now and leave that review. All I want is an honest, unbiased review. And thank you ever so much. And there's a lot of you that have been asking for updates on my muscle building process. Obviously, I lost all my muscle that I possibly could last year. So I shot up 27.4 pounds really, really quickly in the space of like 6 weeks. I've since brought off about 10 of those pounds because I just wanted to lean out a little bit, and I felt that I was putting on the weight so quickly. And I've been updating this process every single day on my personal platform, and that is healthkick.com, spelt HEALTHKIK.com. Not only is this about me showing my daily videos of this process, but I make this about you. That's why I've provided you with full guides on controlled fasting, muscle gaining, fat loss, and I provide every single day a blog, a free newsletter that I send out to you that I write on a daily basis. And I also have a magazine within there that goes out bi-monthly. So please do check out Health Kick. And what other things do I have going in the pipeline? Well, I tell you what, I've got my very first retreat happening this October in Sun Valley, Idaho. This is definitely one of my favorite places in the world. Very, very clean air, very low EMF. And this is going to be held in a phenomenal health club and spa called Zenergy. This is an amazing place. Got a great gym there. They have all the spa treatments you could think of. Himalayan sauna, indoor pool, outdoor pool. They got a functional area, hot yoga. It is great. It's a beautiful part of the world that we're going to be holding this retreat. Also all inclusive with the Limelight Hotel. And this is going to cover everything from bodybuilding, hybrid athleticism, anti-aging, biohacking, you name it. We are going to cover it. And I am planning and promising this to be a life-changing experience. October 9th to the 13th. I'm going to put all the links in the show notes. Should you want to check out this website or sign up or anything like that, check out the show notes, and let's get into this podcast. Now, the guest that I have on today is quite interesting. This is going to be a very interesting story, actually. It's quite the opposite. It may sound so to what I usually suggest when I'm saying reach for your goals, go after them, never stop, always persist, where this is a little bit more, no, you are going to quit. However, it's going to be in a different terminology as what you may be used to when you hear the word quitting. So I met this lovely lady a couple of weeks ago through a mutual friend, Sean Wells, at the FitCon convention. And I thought, wow, what a character. Very interesting lady. And we swapped books, and I do have that book here, a good read, I must say so. I read it on the plane, Quitting by Design, and that is by our guest, Dr. Lynn Marie Morski. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I can't wait to have this discussion.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. So do you mind just telling the readers a little bit about yourself first, so we have a quick understanding of who you are before we get stuck into this?
Absolutely. I am a multimedia designer turned physician turned lawyer, now turned quitting evangelist. And I help people destigmatize quitting and lead them to and through their strategic quits through my podcast, which is called Quit Happens, and my book, which you just so kindly showed, called Quitting by Design. And it's my passion to help people get unstuck and stop settling in whatever area of their life might be causing some friction, so that they can live a life most in line with their passions and their values.
Right, interesting. Because normally when we hear the word quit, it has both a negative and positive connotation, I guess. When you think, God, I'm just gonna. I always end up quitting. I always try to work through the weekends, but I end up quitting. I try to persist for my goals or be an entrepreneur, but I quit. So sometimes that has a negative connotation. So what connotation and message do you actually surround quitting by?
I love to make the distinction between what I advocate for, which is strategic quitting, versus what I think you're discussing there, which is giving up. Because quitting, literally, if you look in the dictionary, just means you've stopped doing a thing, right? There is no negative or positive connotation. But a lot of times when you're discussing, like for me in the fitness industry, say it's somebody's training for a triathlon and they have to get up every morning and they just finally get tired of getting up in the morning. Oh, it's going to be cold outside. Oh, I don't want to run this many miles. They give up. But on the other hand, if they're training for a triathlon and their relationships start to suffer, and then their work starts to suffer, and maybe they start to get stress fractures, and then that's causing some inflammation in other areas of their body and their mind are telling them in a million ways, hey, maybe this is not the right thing for you right now. Doesn't mean you'll never do it. And they decide, okay, I'm going to strategically quit training for this triathlon right now. That's not giving up. That's listening to your body when it's like, everything's got its phase in life. Maybe right now you should focus on your relationship or your work and the triathlon. There's another triathlon coming. You can try again. But that's how I make the distinction. It's like, okay, you just give up when something is hard, but you strategically quit when you realize something isn't currently in line with your goals or what you need to focus on right then.
Okay, interesting. Interestingly, I got to ask the question, is this in line with something that you went through during your past, and this is which has kind of projected you in this direction?
It's not only something that I've gone through, it's something that I continue to go through on a day-to-day basis, which is what I love to teach people, like with the book, is that strategic quitting is a framework that you just develop for life. So that when something, because, we're presented with new opportunities all the time. Say tomorrow I start wanting to train for a marathon and then that same thing presents itself. I have to have the framework in place to realize, okay, I'm feeling really anxious about training because it's cutting off my time with my family or something like that. Versus, oh, I'm just having a hard day. If you have the strategic quitting framework in mind, then you're better able to evaluate in every situation that comes to you in the future if this is something I need to stay with or something that isn't working for me right now. So for sure, in my own past, like I said, I was a multimedia designer back in St. Louis, Missouri, and I realized this is not my path. I need to find something that's better. And so what I did is I went through this investigation process. Okay, I thought of every job possible from like dog catcher to florist to doctor. And then when I was like, all right, I think doctor checks all the boxes. And in fact, sports medicine doctor, that's what I want to do. And so I took 10 years and $250,000 of somebody else's money, student loans, to get from where I was, multimedia designer, to sports medicine doctor. And when I got there, I realized, oh, this makes me very anxious. Like seeing patients in like I was seeing 20, patients a day. It was too much. I was having to spend all night at football games, and I realized I wasn't that into football. And like a lot of things came to a head where I was like, I can't spend the rest of my life doing this, even though I just dedicated like a decade to doing it and a lot of money that I'm going to have to pay back. And so I made a lot of little strategic quits. Okay, there's parts of medicine I'm not going to do again. I'm not going to work nights and weekends. I'm quitting working nights and weekends. I'm going to quit having a pager. I'm going to quit writing opioid prescriptions because I saw that was going to become an issue. So the quits don't have to be huge. You can make little quits, just better tailor your jobs and your relationship to what would work for you. And even just yesterday, this is like hot off the press, Kris, I quit the medical job I had for 9 years.
Wow.
Yesterday. Because I finally had to follow my own advice. I had been letting it, do its job. It was great. It was only 10 hours a week and it allowed me a lot of time to do other things. But in those 10 hours, I had a lot of anxiety because I was definitely out of alignment with who I am. I was working with the Department of Defense where I can't talk about plant medicine or a lot of the other things that I believe in for people. And I had to fit into this very specific mold. And after 9 years, I just said, I might not know what the next step is, but I know that this is causing me and my health a little bit too much grief. And so I quit.
That's amazing. There's so much that people can take from that, regardless of where they are in their life, because they may not be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. However, maybe they're in a relationship, because you've just proven that A lot of people can dedicate a big portion of their life and think, wow, there's no way I can turn back now. Maybe they're in a relationship and gone, well, I've dedicated 10 years of my life to this relationship. I guess this is as good as it's going to get. And that fear-based factor prevents them from making that step to basically living their better life. So I really applaud, your devotion, first of all, to actually make a commitment and so say, hey, you know what? We have no rules or regulations that justifies us from sticking to this path. We can go left, we can go right because we have the freedom to do so. So I'd like to ask, obviously a lot of my audience are fitness related, bodybuilders, triathletes, biohackers, etc. In our circumstances or instances with the fitness industry, what are you faced with most? I would assume it would be people trying to quit a certain food, or maybe they're overweight, they're obese, they have a compulsion to food, or maybe smoking. What is the most common question that you get, or the most common patient that you'd have requesting from our industry?
Actually, what's more common, because people in the industry seem to have a lot of control issues. So they may be great at controlling what they eat, and they may be great at forcing themselves to exercise despite their, maybe they don't want to, they don't feel like that day. They seem to be really good at that, especially if they're like the high level power lifters or the bodybuilders or the triathletes, that kind of thing. What I see that they have a harder issue with sometimes is realizing when that path isn't working for them. Or similarly with the biohackers, and this is a very personal quit to me, is like at some point in time, I tried the ketogenic diet. And a lot of people can wrap their identities around what diet they're into. Okay, I'm paleo, I'm keto, or I'm an ultra marathoner. There's so many identities within the fitness realm that we can get all wrapped up in. And then suddenly you realize for me, by the way, I was not doing ketogenic diet perfectly, but at some point in time I had to realize I have to quit the ketogenic diet. This isn't working for me. And there's so much wrapped in that. By this time, all the podcasts you're following are the keto podcasts, and the people you follow on Instagram are all the keto people who are going to look at you funny if you have a carb. And you have to make this whole kind of a lifestyle change. And same thing with if you're getting out of bodybuilding or powerlifting. This may be, if you realize okay, that phase is coming to an end, either you've got an injury or maybe you just need to move on. It can be really difficult if you've built your entire social circle and your whole world around these things.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Let me ask you, why wasn't the ketogenic diet working for you? Because I have a few people on a ketogenic diet. My father's on it. My mother-in-law's on it. For them, it is easier for them to follow, especially when they combine it with intermittent fasting. But I do know there's a lot of people that go a little bit out of control and use that justification to have loads of ghee, loads of butter, loads of full fat dairy and creams. And next thing that they've got either health issues or they're gaining way too much weight because they go a little bit overboard. You still have to count those macros to a certain degree. What was it that didn't work with you?
First off, I was doing it wrong, and I'm well aware. And this was back in 2015, 2016, and it came right near another major quit I made in my life. That had I made this quit first, I think ketogenesis might have worked for me. But I have quit cooking. I don't enjoy cooking, and I have always tended a little bit toward orthorexia. So I could spend way too much of my day investigating the perfect thing to be cooking and then going to the store and reading macros like crazy. By the end of the day, I've worked up so much anxiety around the thing I'm going to cook that any health benefits from whatever diet I'm doing are probably counteracted by how much anxiety I just had.
Your cortisol is already spiked.
Exactly. And I had to realize that and say, hey, I've got a lot of other things going on. There are meal delivery services out there. And this is when meal delivery was really new. Now you can get keto meal delivery right and left. But back in the day, even to find a paleo meal delivery, which is what I settled with, was kind of a rough find. But that's why ketogenic diet wasn't working for me, because I don't cook. And so I was literally just eating 4 bars a day and 2 kombuchas. 4 protein bars a day, because the cooking was too stressful. I didn't know how to make meat. I'm not a chef. And essentially, I think any benefits I would have gotten, like you said, were counteracted by the extreme stress of trying to do it right. And I ended up gaining a lot of weight. And I met with, and this is a big quit for me, is when I met with this. She was actually not even a dietitian. She was like a fitness competitor, but she said, I'm going to work with a dietitian. We're going to get you a plan. And here, there are some carbs on it. I had like a moment of massive anxiety in my living room as she's handing this to me. And I'm like, I have to eat a carb, like a sweet potato, not just like a little bit of carbs, like a lot of carbs. I lost all the weight and more on this diet that she had made for me, but I ended up, finding meal delivery that could actually do the meals for me properly. I was no longer cortisoling all over the place trying to make these meals myself. And once I got out of that kind of like keto fear cycle or whatever, and just got into something else that worked, it worked better for me. And I also have done my DNA testing, and I know that I'm going, supposedly per the DNA, going to do better on a higher carbohydrate diet. But for me, I just know that. Go ahead.
What is your DNA by interest? Like, what is your ancestral background?
I've just found this out. Ancestrally, I always thought I was mostly German and Polish. My last name's Morski, very Polish. But it turns out I'm like French, German, Polish, that kind of.
Oh, so you do well on
European.
potatoes then?
Exactly. And that's, it made total sense when I saw that. I was like, we're a potato eating people, like all of those things. So, it was a combination of like the anxiety I felt, luckily kind of reinforced with a little DNA testing in there. And I was like, I think this carb's going to be okay. But even for myself, that was a major quit I had to quit fearing carbs. Yeah. And there's these little quits along the way that, like my identity had been like, I'm doing this keto thing. Well, it wasn't serving me. So I had to quit that identity and like move on and realize you're so much more than just a keto person. And that's what I like to tell anybody who's watching this, who's going through a struggle of having to separate from an identity. You're not just a power lifter. You're not just a bodybuilder. You may be a painter or a boyfriend or a dad or a musician. There's so many things in you that when you are faced with that identity quit, try to focus on the fact that you're not losing yourself. You're just walking away from a little aspect of it, maybe even just for a time being, but there's still a lot more to you.
Yeah. So do you suggest then, because obviously when you're quitting one thing, a lot of the times the suggestions that you put in place is that you have something else to replace that. Is that something that you suggest as opposed to like, okay, you're going to quit this, you're not going to do it anymore. However, here's an alternative that you are going to direct your focus on to now. Maybe they're an adrenaline junkie and they like to get that endorphin rush from something, but now they have to direct that endorphin fix elsewhere.
That's a good point. I mean, I would say before just replacing it, maybe take a little bit more of a deep dive and figure out where that need for adrenaline is coming from.
Yeah.
Because are you just going to these adrenaline-based activities because you're trying to maybe distract yourself from ever? I know a lot of people that have so many identities and they're doing so many things because they're kind of afraid to have like alone quiet time with themselves and their thoughts. Mm-hmm. And that may be something to investigate. And if you investigate and you're like, no, I just really like adrenaline. I have a healthy, I've done the inner work. My balance is healthy. Then sure, go ahead and if you feel as though there's going to be a void, fill it with something else. But for I think a lot of us, we're high achievers. We don't have a void. We have almost an excess of things we're trying to do, right? Yeah. I play musical instruments and I sing and I do the doctoring and the lawyering and I do the biohacking. And on top of it, for 7 years, I was a capoeirista, the Brazilian martial art. And there were literally just not enough hours in the day for everything I was trying to do. And quitting the identity of being a capoeirista was huge. Like my entire social circle was built around it. I spoke another language. I'd been to Brazil a bunch of times. People thought of me as like the Polish ninja. And I had to walk away and say like, this definitely served me for a period of time where I didn't feel strong. And now I feel strong. And I used to need a challenge. And now I run my own business. And that's a challenge. I don't need like a ton of extra challenges. Again, cortisol. So I had to say, like, this identity, it doesn't even need to be replaced with something else. It was just kind of on top of everything else a little too much. And that's an evaluation that each person would have to make. Like, if they're giving away the only thing that was their fun pastime, it's not working for them anymore, sure, find another. But it may be a situation where you actually can just let one go because you may need some just downtime to yourself and may find that beneficial.
Interesting. Yeah, when you're talking now, there's so many people that come to mind that I'm thinking, wow, I need to connect them with you. Because luckily for myself, I acknowledged this within myself last year. Like I've always been very competitive, competed in motocross for many, many years. Then I went directly from that to downhill mountain biking, then directly into bodybuilding. And I'd always participate in other stuff, other recreational stuff, whether it be snowboarding, surfing, or other mountain biking, whatever. And then obviously started doing the ultra marathon, Ironman, etc. And I thought, you know what? in 2019, I am going to do nothing. I will participate. I am not going to compete in anything because I know that I'm not going to be competing for the rest of my life. And I don't want to have that anxiety for always seeking a challenge, must have a challenge, because it can be exhausting. You do have to shut off so many people and so many aspects of your life. You are focused on that one thing. But I always said the worst day of my life was always going over that finish line, regardless if I finished first, second, third, whatever, because then you're just left with this abyss, this black hole, because you've spent so many years trying to achieve, going after anything. And then you think whatever you are searching for is there at the end on that platform, on that podium, and it's not. And then you're left with this anxiety. What do I do? And I have a very, very good friend, who is, I've said she's the female version of me, but much more extreme. And she's kind of left with that predicament now. She's not participating in a challenge. And I know that is having an effect on her. And maybe this is a good time for her just to take this year out and just collect herself and try to be present as opposed to just always searching that challenge for the future, regardless of if it's a good cause, because it's always for a good cause. Always, but you have to put yourself first in order to give more of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember reading that part of your book. I believe you said that in your book, that whole emptiness from the finish line.
Yeah.
And what's going to be next. And I really identified with that. And I'm glad you brought it up because at that point, if you're just always chasing something, and I've been there, I've been like addicted to goals, essentially, like you said, kind of addicted to challenges. And you may want to stop every once in a while and say, like, why am I addicted to these? Is it for me or is it for other people? Because they can definitely be for both reasons. Okay, I feel good about myself when I accomplish this goal. Absolutely. But I've definitely had some goals in life that I've realized, this is going to look good to others. And it may be that period of silence where you actually stop, and, like you said, take that time off and realize, okay, am I itching to do something else because I feel as though I won't be fulfilled otherwise? And then that's a conversation to have with yourself. Like, okay, can you be fulfilled without these things? Like you said, especially if you get an injury or some reason you can't compete forever. I mean, we all get older. There's at some point in time, maybe we can't. We know about the Iron Nun. She's still competing at 90 or however old she is.
She's my biggest inspiration.
Right? She's fantastic. But at some point, if life happens, maybe somebody starts a family and they can't compete that year because they need to be with their family or a relative gets sick. It's best to not be completely reliant on those things for your identity and for your satisfaction, because sometimes they can be taken away. And so it's good, like you said, to take some time off and realize, why am I always chasing these goals? Can I be okay without them and have them just be the icing on the cake?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally understand that. Now, there's one of these, what came up into my head, I lived in Venice Beach, California, at the mecca of bodybuilding when I first moved over here, because I had a contract as a writer and photographer for Weeder publications. And I came across so many bodybuilders from other states, other countries, and, they thought that their gift to stardom, whether mostly in bodybuilding, was training out of the Mecca. And you really wanted to be honest with these people, but you were in no place to tell them, look, you just don't have what it takes. Regardless of who recognizes you, you're not going to get recognized for any achievements in the bodybuilding circle because you just don't have it. It's a hard pill to swallow. But genetics and work ethic do go a long way. And some of them just didn't have it, but they persist. And I see it all the time. People will persist for that goal. And some will argue, well, just leave them to it because, they're happy trying to work for that. A lot of these people do have body dysmorphia. They don't see exactly, what they have or don't have. What would you suggest for our listeners? Because there's a lot of people out there always searching for that first place, always trying to get that pro card, always wanting to be Mr. Olympia, but they just don't have it. What is your suggestions and advice for these individuals?
Well, it's twofold. The book by Seth Godin called The Dip, which is the initial book on quitting. It specifically focuses on the should you quit or not question. My book goes a little bit beyond that, but Seth is just honed in on that situation you're talking about. And he says, if you're not going to be the best in the world, quit. And now I think that's a little extreme. I think he's being a little hyperbolic to make a point there. But if you're going to be spending as much time, I used to go to the Mecca as well in Venice, and I see these people, you're right, they're 3-4 hours a day. If you're going to be dedicating that much time and it's not because you just love to be there, it's because you're going for this goal that's never going to happen. I mean, it's worth stopping and thinking like, is there something that I may be more successful at that I could be spending this time doing? And then similarly, if you're going and going and going at this goal, and like you said, it seems to be a little bit delusional, it's not happening. Again, just stop and realize, like, why do I feel so driven to do this? Like you said, the drive for fame. Is it that there's something missing within you that you need external validation? A lot of times that's what it is. People are looking for validation from society through fame or through like a status that they get. And I mean, I'm not saying this is other people. This is myself too. A lot of times we don't realize it till we stop and ask ourselves, why are we doing a thing?
Interrupting this show to make a quick cup of coffee using Laird's Superfood Creamer. Now, if you've been following my socials over the last couple of years, you'll see that I've been using this product, which has really changed my coffee game completely. If I go to a coffee shop and ask them for an Americano or something, which is usually rather boring and bland, and I add some of this Laird Superfood Creamer, it completely changes the taste profile, but it's healthy. And what I like about this company is that it was started by big wave surfer legend Laird Hamilton, who I actually interviewed on his podcast some weeks ago. And I'll put a link to that show in the show notes. And he explained that the company started over a cup of coffee that he shared with his friends because he wanted them to drink the healthiest cup of coffee out there. And they absolutely loved it. So then what started out of a very authentic way of sharing this, it turned into a business. And just take a look at the ingredients. Laird Superfood products are made using only the highest quality, all natural, whole food ingredients. They don't use any extracts, fillers, gums, synthetic vitamins, artificial flavors, or lab-made ingredients, which makes it my go-to for every coffee that I have. If you want to try Laird Superfood Creamer for yourself, use the code GETHIN20 to receive 20% off your first purchase. Just your first purchase, and make sure it's a big one. All you got to do is go to lairdsuperfood.com, and again, I will put that link in the show notes. But until then, let's get back into the show.
I just had somebody an hour ago on my podcast who spent 8.5 years trying to get into the FBI. He doesn't end up getting in. He fails the polygraph.
Oh, wow.
8.5 years. And when he stopped and asked himself, like, is there any good reason I didn't get in? He finally had to say, what were my reasons for wanting to get into the FBI? And he realized they were all externally based. Oh, I'd have this status. It's prestigious. I get to walk around with a gun. There's all these kind of, like myth and aura to the FBI. None of it was because he personally thought, like, I really want to like contribute to Homeland Security or whatever would make a person internally want to do that. So if you're going for this Mr. Olympia thing or some other stardom, insta famous through whatever method you're trying, is it because you really need external validation? I mean, on the flip side, maybe you really want to draw attention to yourself because you've got a great charity you'd like to support. Okay, that's something. But if you're just constantly doing it for external validation, it's worth like taking a step back just for your own peace of mind. Because say, again, if you can't train for a little bit and you're even put further back on your trip to Mr. Olympia that's not happening anyway, that's going to have a big effect on your psyche. You need to have a psyche that's intact and not reliant on these things that you're able to do. You have to try as best, and it's a struggle for all of us, to be okay with who we are in knowing that we're a good person without having to do a certain thing or achieve a certain thing or look a certain way.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of it comes from as well just taking things for granted as well? A lot of us do not come from third world countries. A lot of us don't ever visit a third world country. However, when you do, you see what people don't have. And then in comparison, we have so much. But we don't acknowledge it. So we're always chasing something and we're never actually being present enough to actually acknowledge, be appreciative of what we do have. And then, as you mentioned, being Insta famous, we have in this day and age this instant gratification that we're always searching for. And we see the person with the polished abs and the sometimes photoshopped face or booty or what, as it were. And there's a lot of comparison there. Instead of being happy with ourselves, like, I'm never going to be tall, dark and handsome. However, I could be 2% better. But one of the first things I'm going to do is not compare myself to anyone else. Do you find that's a major issue now, especially in this day and age, that people are, they should maybe quit Instagram altogether because it's getting them down, because they're looking for that classification from a like and that recognition from a follow?
Yeah, it's a rough one because so many of us have to use Instagram for our business. And I really wish that were not the case because all of us get into that. I remember my first plant medicine experience. I had just started a podcast and I had, was just starting the Instagram thing. And you get very wrapped up into the fact that those likes are probably going to translate for me as I'm trying to start a business that's going to get me out of practicing medicine. Like I said, I just quit it yesterday and the podcast started a year and a half ago. So to me, it wasn't likes for likes' sake. It was like likes that would eventually translate into dollars, which even was more of a, okay, I got to get them because then I got to get the swipe up so more people will hear my podcast and then they'll ask me to speak and then maybe I can get out of medicine. There was so much writing on those. And then when I had kind of the ego disillusion, it was this like, what am I without the likes? Do I need any likes? And then it goes further back. I was like, what am I without these degrees? Like, am I still a quality person? Like, it takes some like real investigation to realize that at the core of it, we just have to be, we don't have to be, but it behooves us to wake up and just be grateful that we are awake and alive and generally have a roof over our head. Like you were saying, you spent a lot of time in India. You probably saw a ton of people who didn't. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of different scenarios. And most people watching this podcast or watching this show have a roof over their head and they've got the technology to watch this. And it takes kind of stripping away all of that chatter of the comparison and the likes and the dopamine hits from the people who follow you and all those kinds of things to be like, can I just go on a walk and be grateful that like, oh, hey, today's a sunny day and I have the two legs that can walk and I have a family that will support me if I fell down right now and broke my leg and somebody probably would come pick me up. Like it changes your whole psyche when you, like you said, you learn to appreciate the little things. And we get it's when you get caught up in all the Instagram world, it's really hard to focus on those things. So it's really important to take some quiet time and some gratitude and have some like gratitude and mindfulness practices so that you can balance that. If you don't need Instagram, maybe let it go. But a lot of us in business, we need it. And so even for us, it just keeps pulling us back in. So I have to take a lot of time to just balance and be like, hey, I'm going to sit here, have my breakfast outside in the sun, no likes, no phone around me, because I'm okay as I am.
Yeah.
And it takes that balancing those two worlds.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm totally with you there because, like you said, our business relies upon it, and unfortunately, our business is mobile. And I do the same thing. Like just before this podcast, I had the phone away. I was outside trying to get some restorative red as the sun is setting. And I'll do the same before I go into the gym. I'll make sure that I'll have 10 minutes outside the gym in the sun, if it's sunny, before going in without the phone and, putting it on airplane mode whenever possible. However, when I go onto the phone, it's efficient and it's time conservative and it isn't just mindless scrolling, because so many times you can get caught and go down that rabbit hole and you don't even remember why you picked up the phone in the first place because you get distracted, and you have to be very, very mindful of that. It is definitely addicting, and I've seen it's controlled a lot of people. It's probably led to obesity to a lot, because they get comfort, they get that dopamine fix, and then they get their chocolate to eat with it, and they get that double dopamine fix, and then it's addicting, So I totally get you there. So moving back to, we had a brief discussion about this in Salt Lake, talking about a lot of people when they quit bodybuilding, because or whether it be Ironman, triathlon, or Spartan events, whatever it may be. But I've seen it a lot in bodybuilding where people, they retire and they just go into a form of depression or maybe another addiction, whether that be recreational drugs or alcohol. I'm sure it happens in a lot of other sports as well, but I've seen it definitely happen in bodybuilding. They don't have the physique that they once did. They don't have the confidence. Maybe they don't have the notoriety or the following as they once did. Like, have you worked with people in those instances, and how do you help people? Because I know there's a lot of those listening to this podcast now, and maybe they're going through that at the present, or they're approaching that. What are your fundamental suggestions for those?
Yeah, absolutely. That is an identity quit, like we were talking about before. Like if your entire identity was I'm an ultra marathoner, I'm a power lifter, that is going to be very difficult to just cut that off. So before you make that leap, I advise reviewing your identities. Tim Ferriss calls it diversification of identity, which is essentially like if you only have one identity, well, let's work on having a few more before you let that one go. But
Right.
I think if we look deeper, there are a lot of us who have many identities that we just don't think of because they're not in the forefront. They're not what people are seeing about us, right? A lot of us base our identity about what other people think we are. Like, who is Kris Gethin? Let's ask other people. That becomes your identity. But your actual identity should come from within, at least part of it, and realize, like, I am a caring person. Nobody walks around, oh, well, not nobody, but like, what's Lynn Marie? They're going to go with doctor, lawyer, quitting evangelist. I mean, somewhere like 15th on the list might be caring person. But if I know that like that's an identity, okay, I give to charity or I try to volunteer where I can. If that's an identity I know that can't be taken away from me when I leave powerlifting or bodybuilding, then you've got something to hold on to and you haven't, because if somebody says, who are you? And you're like, I'm a power lifter, and you have to stop that, then you're going to have an identity crisis. Who are you? I mean, of course, an identity crisis is going to lead to symptoms of depression and that kind of thing. I would advise that people making that transition get mental help in place, mental health help, be a coach or a therapist. And again, let's try to destigmatize getting help with mental health, because you're fine with getting a trainer in the gym to help your physical health, but the second we're like, how about you get a mind trainer? Oh, I don't need a therapist. Look at it the exact same way. What's more important? Your mind is driving how your body looks. That's what's shooting out the cortisol or shooting out the hormones that are going to make you heavy or fit. Well, let's get a mind trainer in place to help you make that transition. That's why I love doing what I do, because I'm getting people in the rough transitions. Like, okay, you're going to have that identity quit come up. Let's talk about the other identities so we can focus on those. I've led people through, okay, maybe they were kind of musicians, but they're going to leave this thing. I'm like, well, let's start doing some open mics. Like, let's start working on your musicianship side so you don't just identify as this activity you're going to leave. You have had this other thing you love doing the whole time. Like you said, that's a good instance where replacing one with the other is a good way to transition, because you don't want to go from something to zero, like, and have them feel like they have no identity. Most people have more than one thing going on. Let's try to focus a little more in that other area. Or even better, let's focus a little bit more on others. Like, okay, you're going from a power lifter to, okay, if you're really in the public eye as a power lifter bodybuilder, you've got this big following, can you start using that for charity purposes? Like, all right, I might not be competing anymore, but I'm going to do some appearances at some charity things. Let's focus on that. And then you shifted your identity, and you're still getting notoriety, but it's for something external to yourself where you're giving. That's going to help, I think, that emptiness that could come otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously with media at play now, they can be an online coach if they're a powerlifter and provide content, and they're still going to get that recognition. But it's funny that you said that we identify ourselves with our job, don't we? Like I have it, I believe on my profile I have bodybuilder, Ironman athlete, YouTube channel, and we identify ourselves with that. It's funny as an author, but you never actually say like, I'm a good person. I'm 5'8", I'm short, dark, and stumpy. But it's
short, dark, stumpy.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. But we don't, because we put ourselves up on the pedestal of what we are, and everybody says, "So what do you do?" And we always directly go to our job, as opposed to what our true identity is. So, so speaking of identity, so now you just quit your job yesterday. So what is going to be your focus now with your, as a doctor? Are you going to translate that, or are you just going to focus on this, being the quitting evangelist, or what is going to be your primary focus?
Well, the quitting evangelist thing will always be there. I mean, I'll just put this out there in the universe. It is my goal of all lifetime to just make my entire living off of talking about quitting to people, because I could do this all day long. I love it. I'm super passionate about it. But what I love to do now, I've been seeing patients in clinic for 9 years, and this one-on-one caring, or I wasn't even doing patient care. I was doing evaluation so they would get benefits. So it wasn't even like I was caring for a person. They were just getting money, just kind of, caring in a way. However, I feel as though I can do a lot more good globally using my medical degree in a way that I can either promote health in certain ways. Like I've recently been working with an app that promotes sexual health. Takes away some of the taboo about getting tested for different sexually transmitted infections. Or I have another opportunity to work with maybe bringing more of plant medicine type relief to people. Those are things I'm very passionate about that there's a medical twist to. So if I can be a medical director for one of those things, I have that as a passion of mine. So that's where I'm going to be focusing, is where I can use the medical degree and not less of a one-on-one and more of a globally impactful situation.
You should set up shop like a marquee or something like that outside these music festivals talking about sexual health. I'm sure you heard about the herpes outbreak at Coachella, didn't you?
Oh, no, I was the one in People magazine talking about it because that's the company I work for.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I knew that.
You knew that. No, there was no herpes outbreak at Coachella. It was it got mischaracterized. So I spent most of the first day of Paleo Effects calling People magazine no. It was just people came to the app in droves wanting either medication or treatment for it or asking if they had it. But it for sure came out herpes outbreak at Coachella. Yeah, I was the one responsible for being no, hold on, that's close, but not exactly what happened. And yeah, so that's why kind of the sexual health thing came about. That's so funny that you saw that. Yeah, that definitely, that was me.
I don't know who didn't.
Right. I know. Somebody referred to me as Dr. Herpes yesterday. They're like, oh, you quit your job, you're going to go on to be famous Dr. Herpes. I was not sure that's where I'm going with this, but
hey,
it did.
Any news is good news. Let's go. I'm going to EDC next month, so we'll create an outbreak there for you.
Please do. But yeah, since that conversation got opened and I'm fine with talking about that, hey, if I can be, a medical face to talk about, let's have more frank discussions about sexual health, I'd be happy to be in that space.
Yeah, I bet. So when you talk about plant medicine, that's what really intrigues me as well, because I'm very much into alternative medicine and obviously biohacking my health as much as possible with the low-hanging fruits, with things that are natural to us. What do you see is, really prominent plant medicine in regards to what most athletes deal with, and that is inflammation? Is there anything that you suggest that is very new, upcoming, or something that we've used in the past, whether it be turmeric or anything of the like, that works for inflammation? Because we're always dealing with knee, joints, elbows, etc.
Yeah, I will be more specific. So when I'm talking about plant medicine, I'm talking a little bit more of the neck up plant medicine.
Nootropics?
Or ayahuasca.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I'm interested in that. So you have done the ayahuasca journeys in South America.
I have done them here. And by the way, this is the first time I've ever said it in public because I work for the Department of Defense and I could never say it before. But yeah, I have. Ayahuasca is legal to be here under the Brazilian religion. Santo Daime is how they are able to bring it into the country for religious ceremonies. And it was extremely helpful to me. I did it one time and it was here's 20 years of therapy in 7 very obvious descriptions. And I feel as though it's an adjunct that a lot of people, maybe they have this mental health stigma, I won't go to a therapist kind of thing, but they're okay with trying something like that. Great. I think it's just a really important tool to help people, like I said, with kind of that ego disillusion. If you're really wrapped up in your ego and your identity, it may behoove you to go inside and have something inside you tell you no, you're okay. You're more than your muscles and you're more than your abilities.
Yeah.
That's what I'm passionate about.
Fantastic, because I've spoken to a lot of people in a lot of entrepreneurs, CEOs of very big companies, and I was speaking to Kris Cavallini, who owns Nutrition Solutions, about this only a couple of days ago, and I've had several discussions with, I don't know if you're aware of 6 times former Mr. Olympia, Dorian Yates. Well, he's gone from one extreme of being the most hardcore bodybuilder you could ever imagine to going on this journey with various psychedelics, mostly ayahuasca. And he's actually hosting one for the very first time this year in Costa Rica in July with a couple of shaman. And he's asked me several times to go because he feels that it would be very good for me. However, I'm petrified, to be honest with you. I'm I don't know if I want to change anything, Dorian. He says, yeah, but these things can change you for the better. Maybe in the future I'll I'll consider that. Maybe it's a 2020 thing. It's definitely not going to be a 2019. But the things that he has told me, how it's life changing, and Dorian's a very intellectual person. He's not going to try to sell you anything. Like, I've known Dorian for many, many years. He's very sincere. He's been very sincere with me, and it's very convincing. I tell you that much. And it's interesting to hear other people's perspective. As you know, maybe I'm your listener right now. For me, and I'm sat here, I'm thinking, well, I don't know if there's anything that I want to change about myself. I'm quite comfortable where I am. Maybe I've got too much of an ego. Maybe I get anxious. Maybe I get extremely stupid when I get stressed and I'm rushed and I'm late. But, you know, I'm not going to go out and burn the house down because I've got no tins of tuna left in the house. You know, what could I get out of something like that, do you think?
Like I said, I got 7 very specific things, and I wouldn't say any of them were things that I was looking for. But just to give you a very concrete example, it taught me how to forgive people in a way that I would have never come up with before. And it doesn't just come to you necessarily say, like, here's how you forgive people. But it just suddenly brought up this scenario in my head that as I was working through it, I realized applies to everybody. And I had just quit a side job that I had because the boss and I were not getting along so well. And when I quit, we had a very frank conversation. And it turns out that the way his parents treated him was leading him to treat me in a certain way that made me anxious because of the way that my parents were. And so essentially what I envisioned was like, we're both just inner children, are like unhealed inner children trying to play in the sandbox together, and it wasn't working. And when I like was in the plants, I realized, hold it, pretty much everybody that's any older than my generation, most of them have not done the work, right? So most of them, including my own parents, are just unhealed inner children trying to raise their own children. And I had to stop and realize, like, my father, who has done a lot of things I don't agree with, I stopped and realized, wow, his parents, they were terrible to him. And he's got a ton of just wounding, but nobody ever said, go to a psychiatrist, go get some therapy. He's from the greatest generation, and they didn't do that. And so what's he do when he has a kid? Well, I mean, his wounds are just going to come on to me. And that's what's happening with pretty much everyone everywhere. And like, until they do the work to heal whatever their inner wounds are, they're just wounded inner children trying to interact with other people's inner wounded children in society. And that just leads to a lot of, friction and problems. And I thought, I have to forgive my dad because he's just doing the best he could with the tools his dad gave him, who was also just doing the best they did because they didn't have any tools to like go inside, learn more about themselves, heal their wounds. And it was so freeing to be able to forgive people on that basis. Like people that, have done lots of terrible things. In that state, I had to realize, like, they're all wounded inner children. And, like, the freeingness of being able to, like, I mean, my father and I have not gotten along. He's very different from me, let's say politically and all those things. But, like, I was able to forgive him. And that for me was huge. And so it was just, like, lessons like that it was, whether or not my inability to forgive my dad was affecting me on a day-to-day basis, maybe not. But it was just a nice, like, tool for life that when something happens to me later, I can say, like, that person's just, some part of their woundedness is hurting, is like taking it out on me right now. It's easier than walking around with a bunch of anger, is walking around with a great tool for forgiveness. And so that's just the kind of like an example of the kind of thing that came up for me. Right.
Okay. So for instance, I wouldn't have an issue, I don't think, because I don't know if I've got anyone I need to forgive. I don't know if anybody's hurt me. I had a great upbringing and stuff like that. But do you think if this is something that I would experience, I would find something within myself that was maybe at fault that I'd be able to bring to the surface and address?
Well, absolutely. So like I said, it was right when I started my own podcast when this took place. And it was a part where I was about to become really wrapped up in like, oh my gosh, do people like me, this and that? And that's a whole nother thing from forgiveness, like a whole separate whatever. But that's a thing that could have become like a wound. And it showed me in very clear terms that I didn't have to do anything or be anybody to be good enough. Because I think a lot of us have this inner I'm not enough wound that we spend our whole lives trying to, okay, I'm going to lift myself until I'm good enough, or I'm going to run until I've achieved enough. Like, whether or not we admit it, there's probably that little wound somewhere in us that drives a lot of our actions. Like, I remember somebody the other day was like, why do you get all these degrees? And like in the typical San Diego too much information format, I was like, oh, I'm sure I have some not good enough wound from childhood. I'm trying to heal. And he was like, I did not see that coming. But that's generally why people just go out and achieve so much. There's different drivers. And so as a person who spent my whole life, like, let me get my doctorate degree, let me get my law degree, and now I have my yoga teacher training, I want a pilot's license. Somewhere in that journey, something said to me, you don't have to do anything anymore. People will still love you just for who you are. And like that's a really freeing piece of information. And the fact that it's coming from within you, like no therapist is telling you this. You can only believe a therapist so much because they're paid to tell you a thing. But when something inside you is released that tells you from your own self, hey, you're okay. You don't need to be doing anything anymore to be worthy. That's really powerful.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that we would do this interview and start talking about ayahuasca, but this is very close to me and it's fascinating. And I get surprisingly quite a lot of people asking me about this, but I'm in no qualified position to do so. So, for instance, for something like this, okay, this is the direction that you're going. How do you, as a practitioner or as a doctor, suggest this? Do you say, okay, I've got an area that you're going to go to, you're going to do this, this is something that I suggest? Or is this, hey, you can have a home delivery, but of course you're going to have carers to help you through this process because you could jump out the window. How does something like this work?
I would only recommend, and it's not something that ever as a doctor, I am saying I'm prescribing. Like there is no doctor-patient relationship with anybody I'm telling this to. Like, P.S. everybody out who's listening, I am not telling you as your doctor to go do this. What I am saying is that there are many tools out there to help you dive into your inner self. There's coaches, there's therapy. This is one of those tools. However, just like with therapy, you want to go to a trained person. Your mind is not something to mess with. I would never do a home thing. Like you said, go somewhere with trained shaman who are there to make the experience as like to facilitate it in a way that's going to be the most beneficial for you and minimize any side effects. Like, yes, it's powerful medicine. Mostly there are no bad things that happen. Yes, sometimes there are bad things that happen with anything. People have died from aspirin, like there are side effects from all kinds of things. But in generally, like, yes, can be a very intense medicine. So you need people around who know how to deal if you're having a really intense time. But that's the main thing I would say is like, and it's not like you were talking about, it's not like you should ever be talked into it. It will call you when you are ready.
Right.
And you should be and feel ready. You should not at all be there and feel like this is not the right time for me. Going into it with that kind of mindset can definitely affect things. And I would highly advise against it. It is a thing that will call you. If you are and I don't know exactly the belief level of people watching, but if you're the person who believes like the universe has my back and there's all kinds of energy and like when something's supposed to come to me, it will, that's exactly the kind of thing that will come to you at the right time. Like for me, I had just quit that job I said with the boss that he and I didn't get along well. And then the opportunity presented itself. And I was like, I had just gotten free of this thing. I was in a great mind space, ready to start a new chapter. Here's this thing. And I was like, perfect, a great like mindset cleansing for me to move into the next phase of my life. Perfect timing. And it was. And I was like I had a great journey. Everything was very clear, laid out to me. I know people who've gone to it at different times have a little rougher experience. However, they still say, and I still firmly believe, that you get the journey that you need. So you may have like somebody close to me and that I met at that first journey had a very difficult time, but what he learned in that journey, he has taken back to his therapist and like they've worked through it, and it's taught him so much about himself that even though it was rough at the time, it was very beneficial for him in the end.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Okay. Well, we're going to have definitely some more discussions about this because I find this very fascinating. I definitely want to go down a rabbit hole on that a little bit more. But anyway, it's been absolutely fantastic connecting with you again. Can you tell us a little bit where people can find you, with your various platforms, should people want to interact with you one-on-one?
Absolutely. You can find me at quittingbydesign.com, which has my podcast called Quit Happens, and then you can pick up the book called Quitting by Design. I'm also at Quitting by Design on Instagram. Flash the book. Thank you, Kris. I wish I had yours in my hand too, but I loved your book. It was
I'm representing instead. It is a fantastic book. It's an easy read, but it's very, very informative.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. Yeah, but go to quittingbydesign.com on Instagram. I even have a Facebook group called Quitopia where like anybody who's going through a quit, we share our quits, we share our journeys, we support each other. So you can find me any of those places. Quit Happens is on all the podcasts.
Awesome.
All the
I love that. Yeah, definitely check out. We'll put all the links into the show notes as well. But please do check out the podcast. And, I know there's a lot of listeners out there that are trying to quit various things. I'm always speaking to a lot of maybe competitors because they like you said, they're carbophobic and they need to quit that phobia. Or maybe they're just, there's a lot of people that I know that deal with anorexia or they're binge eating. They diet hard, then they binge eating. There's a lot of things out there that people should be focused on quitting as opposed to, maybe trying to, what is the word that I'm looking for? Comfort themselves with all these external applications that they have addressing them now, whether it be an addiction to phone, food, or whatever. So please do check that out. But thank you ever so much. I really, really appreciate having you on, and I'll definitely be giving you a call.
I loved our chat. Thank you so much for having me on, Kris.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. That is another episode of the Knowledge and Mileage podcast. As I mentioned, everything that we spoke about today is in the show notes. We will have a link there to Quitting by Design, the book and the podcast. So everybody, until next week, I'm Kris Gethin and I am out.